And it really helps to mark and identify that this story takes place somewhere around 50 to 60 years after the death of Joshua. Not very far into when these great leaders of Israel passed away. And it gives you an idea of how quickly things can change, right, within a nation. And it just makes you wonder, you can speculate why the author had this anonymity of characters. And, you read some people's ideas and thoughts, and it's kind of interesting. One thought was that perhaps by not naming these people, they really represent the general behavior of Israel as a nation. And so I want us to consider as we go through, we're going to start in Judges 19, but let's consider tonight the escalation of the cause and effect of doing what's right in your own eyes. It starts here, and it's going to end way far down the road in something that's not very good at all. So let's begin in verse 1, chapter 19. And it says, "Now it came about in those days when there was no king in Israel, there was a certain Levite staying in the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, who took a concubine for himself from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for a period of 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak tenderly to her in order to bring her back, taking with him his servant and a pair of donkeys. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he was glad to meet him. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him and remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. Now on the 4th day, they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. And the girl's father said to his son-in-law, 'Sustain yourself with a piece of bread, and afterward you may go.' So both of them sat down and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, 'Please be willing to spend the night, and let your heart be merry.' Then the man arose to go, but his father-in-law urged him, so that he spent the night there again. On the 5th night, he arose to go early in the morning, and the girl's father said, 'Please sustain yourself and wait until the afternoon.' So they both ate. When the man arose to go with his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, 'Behold, now the day is drawn to a close. Please spend the night. Lo, the day is coming to an end. Spend the night here, that your heart may be merry. Then tomorrow you may arise early and go on your journey, that you may go home.'" Verse 10. "But the man was not willing to spend the night. So he arose and departed and came to a place opposite Jebus," that is Jerusalem. "And there were with him a pair of saddle donkeys. His concubine also was with him. And they were near Jebus. The day was almost gone. And the servant said to his master, 'Please come and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it.' However, his master said to him, 'We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who are not of the sons of Israel, but we will go on as far as Gibeah.' He said to his servant, 'Come and let us approach one of these places, and we will spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah.' So they passed along and went their way, and the sun set on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside in order to enter and lodge in Gibeah. When they entered, they sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night." So we sort of begin a story of an anonymous Levite and his concubine. Some of your translations in verse 2, mine said that she played the harlot. Some may say that she got angry. There's question as to really what the crisis was, but there was some marital crisis. She left. She left him and went to go to her father's house and was gone 4 months. So the husband comes to persuade her to come back and brings a donkey and 2 donkeys and a servant. Certainly starts out pretty well. He meets the father-in-law. Everything's going well. The father-in-law actually wants him to stay more, right? Keep staying. And he stays a night, but then come the fifth day, he's ready to go. But he's been detained until the afternoon, so he's getting a late start. So all these things start to play out. And because he's getting a late start, he's going to enter a city at night. And so they go to this city. They first come to this Jebus, which is a foreign Canaanite city. And he doesn't want to stay there. He wants to pass over. He didn't feel safe being in a foreign city. He said, let's go to where our brothers are, to a safer place. Let's go to the Benjamite city of Gibeah. Well, that was a great idea. They arrived at night, and they're at the city square, and they're expecting somebody to take them in, which is kind of the custom when one of your countrymen come into that area. The hospitality is to take them in, right? So he's expecting that, and so that's where we leave off in verse 15. So let's pick up in verse 16. Then behold, an old man was coming out of the field from his work at evening. Now the man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was staying in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. And he lifted up his eyes, and he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going? And where did you come from? And he said, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim. For I am from there, and I went to Bethlehem in Judah, but now I'm going to my house, and no man will take me into his house. Yet there is both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and also wine for me, your maidservant, and the young men who was with your servants. There is no lack of anything. In other words, we're good. We'll just probably hang out in the square tonight. The old man said to him, peace be to you. Only let me take care of you and all your needs. However, do not spend the night in the open square. So he took them into his house and gave the donkeys fodder, and he washed their feet, and they ate and they drank. So here's a foreigner in the city, an old man that's an Ephraimite who's visiting, doing some work. He takes them in. Any of the Benjamites that are there, the native people, they don't take them in. So there's already a little bit of what you would call maybe a social injustice, right? You would expect to be honored if he passed over the Jebusite city because he thought his countrymen would take him in. So it's interesting, this foreigner, this Ephraimite, takes him in. But then we get to verse 22, and so this is perhaps the most shocking and grotesque story in the whole book of Judges, right here. And there's all kinds of things going on here that we're going to see. And I want us to read through 22 through 30, and then we'll come back and make some comments on this. But it all sounds good. Let's go to his house, right? So verse 22, they were celebrating. Behold, the men of the city, certain worthless fellows, surrounded the house, pounding the door. And they spoke to the owner of the house, the old man, saying, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may have relations with him. Then the man, the owner of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not commit this act of folly. Here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out to you, that you may ravish them and do whatever you wish. But do not commit such an act of folly against this man. But the men would not listen to him. So the man, the Levite, seized his concubine and brought her out to them. And they raped her and abused her all night until morning, and then let her go at the approach of dawn. As the day began to dawn, the woman came and fell down at the doorway of the man's house where her master was until full daylight. Verse 27. When her master arose in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, then behold, his concubine was lying at the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, get up and let's go. But there was no answer. Then he placed her on the donkey, and the man arose, and he went to his home. So It's an interesting story. As you read this, it started to, bring back memories of something like that. Isn't something like this happened before? And if you recall Lot, right, the two angels visited Lot in the city of Sodom. So there's this interesting parallels here between Judges 19, verses 15 through 26, the account of the two angels visiting Lot in the city of Sodom, and Genesis 19. As we read through this whole story here. And so it's interesting as you compare these, there's a small group of travelers that arrive in the city in the evening. Both these things happen in both stories. A person who is himself an alien observes the presence of these travelers. The travelers have a mind to spend the night in an open square. At the insistence of the host, the travelers agree to spend the night in his house. The host and the guests share a meal. Depraved men of the city surround the house. They demand the host deliver his male guests for them to commit homosexual rape. The host protests this display of wickedness, and then finally, when the protests prove futile, a substitute female is offered or handed over. And so when you read in Genesis the story of Sodom, you automatically start to think how wicked that city is, how terrible it is. And what happened to that city? You guys remember? What did God do to that city? He burned it up, right? He destroyed it. And so the behavior that occurred in Sodom is occurring here in Gibeah, in the city of the Benjamite tribe, some 50 or 60 years after the death of Joshua. So you really kind of get that ground level view of the corruption and the evil that is pervasive here. So the author, I think, really tries to draw those parallels to really make a point. They're going to know and understand the story of Sodom. And for generations to come, they're going to be associating this behavior with that. And in both cases, women are irrelevant. Really what's, in this case, probably the host honor, the honor of the host is probably more important than justice or morality. Rather than try to stand up to the men, I've got this male host, this male guest that I'm hosting, and I can't possibly take him out there and let these men abuse him. So I'm willing to offer my daughter and his concubine, to kind of save my honor. And the Levite himself, kind of takes matters into his own hand, and he throws out his concubine. The one he came miles 4 months later to sweet talk to her, he throws her out there to be raped and abused. And then she falls down at the doorway with her hand on the doorway, reaching for help and reaching for protection, reaching for his strength. And she didn't have the strength to even knock on the door or make any noise. And we read on that she ends up dying right there, right? But he came to sweet talk her in verse 3, but then he tells her to get up when he sees her on the threshold of his door. He doesn't seem to have any problem going to sleep that night, waking up, going outside. Let's see what we got out here. And okay, get up, let's go. And it's just interesting that's the mindset of this Levite. That's what's going on in the story. So we read on, verse 29, he puts her on the donkey, he enters his house, he took out a knife, and he laid hold of his concubine, and he cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and he sent her throughout the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, nothing like this has ever happened or has been seen in the day, or from the day when the sons of Israel came up from the land of Egypt to this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up. So really what he's doing is he's setting the stage for some revenge, right? I'm going to take her body, I'm going to cut it up, and I'm going to send it to all the different tribes, and I'm going to rally up against this city of Gibeah, and I want revenge. And so what started as an innocent enough attempt to get his wife back, or his concubine, right, not his wife. And actually started before that. She left him, and in this culture, that was not really something that women did, as the men could divorce, but not the women, right? So people doing what's right in their own eyes. She left him. He went to go find her. The series of events come to where she's now dead, and there's this tragedy, and there's a need for justice. And so that's where chapter 19 kind of concludes. So we pick up in chapter 20. The story continues here in chapter 20. In verse 1, it says, "Then the sons of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, then all the sons of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, came out, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. The chiefs of all the people, even all the tribes of Israel, took their stand in the assembly of the people, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the sons of Benjamin heard that the sons of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the sons of Israel said, 'Tell us, how did this wickedness take place?' So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, 'I came with my concubine to spend the night in Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. But the men of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. And they intended to kill me. Instead, they ravished my concubine so that she died. And I took hold of my concubine, and I cut her into pieces, and I sent her throughout the land of Israel's inheritance. For they have committed a lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Behold, all you sons of Israel, give your advice and counsel here.'" So he kind of doesn't really tell the whole story here. It's kind of all about him. They weren't necessarily wanting to kill you. You just threw her out there because you didn't want to get raped. And yeah, maybe you would have suffered the same fate, but it says they ravished. Well, you threw her out there. So he leaves out some of the details of the story. But verse 8, it says, "Then all the people arose as one man, saying, 'Not one of us will go to his tent, nor will any of us return to his house. But now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. And we will take 10 men out of 100 throughout the tribes of Israel. We will take 100 out of 1,000, 1,000 out of 10,000 to supply food for the people, that when they come to Gibeah of Benjamin, they may punish them for all the disgraceful acts that they have committed in Israel.' Thus all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, united as one man." So there's a justice piece of this that really is fitting, right? There needs to be justice. There needs to be this punishment of the people responsible for this. So it all kind of makes sense, and it's like, wow, they're kind of coming together here. This seems to be going pretty well. And then they approach the tribe of Benjamin. And it says in verse 12, "Then the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the entire tribe of Benjamin, saying, 'What is this wickedness that has taken place among you? Now then, deliver up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove this wickedness from Israel.' But the sons of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the sons of Israel. The sons of Benjamin gathered from the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against the sons of Israel." They're willing to defend these guys. Really, it's more about pride, isn't it, right? We're not going to listen to them. And we're going to defend these worthless people that really need to be punished. We're going to go ahead and defend them. And we're actually going to fight against you. So, from the cities, verse 15, "From the cities on that day, the sons of Benjamin were numbered, 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah who were numbered, 700 choice men. Out of these people, 700 choice men were left-handed. Each one of them could sling a stone at a hair and not miss." So these guys are pretty tough, right? I mean, pretty tough guys. They can take a sling, and we know what David did with a sling, right? With God's help. But that was skill by David, because we knew that he had developed that skill, and God used that skill with his power to defeat Goliath. But we know how powerful that weapon can be. So you've got 26,000, you've got these 700 choice men, and in the men of Israel, they got 400,000 who draw the sword. So they're kind of outnumbered. And so now we get to the part of the story where there's a civil war. It actually escalates to this. All the sons of Israel against Benjamin. And it's kind of about pride. And we see further escalation occurring. And so I'm not going to read through the account. It's 18 through 48. But in summary, verse 18, it says, "Now the sons of Israel arose, went up to Bethel and inquired of God." That's interesting. "And said, 'Who shall go up first for us to battle against the sons of Benjamin?' Then the Lord said, 'Judah shall go up first,'" just like the Lord said in chapter 1, right? Judah would go first. Well, it's interesting. They don't ask, should we? They ask, who should go first? They don't ask God, should we actually go to war? Should we fight the Benjamites? Or they just say, who should go up first? God says, Judah should go first. Okay, we got God behind us. So they go out, and 22,000 of their men die in battle. We read of that in verse 21 of the sons of Israel. So verse 23 comes, and the sons of Israel weep before the Lord, and they ask a different way. They ask, shall we again battle against our brother Benjamin? So not who should go up first, but hey, should we even be doing this, right? So the question's framed a little bit differently. And God just simply says, go up against him. And so, okay, we've got God telling us to do this. They go out, 18,000 men die. And they get defeated. So verse 26 comes, and it says, the sons of Israel and all the people came to Bethel and wept and fasted before the Lord. And, inquired of him. And God's answer this time was a little different. It was more definitive. It was more of a promise, an assurance. God's answer is, go up for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand. And this is the passage in verse 28 where we read about Phinehas was the priest at the time, and it kind of, like I said, it dates when this really occurs within the judge's timeline. And so they have this definitive answer from God, this promise. The men of Israel go out, they draw them out into battle like they did before, and they chase them, they get them to come out. All the soldiers come out, they leave the city exposed. They set an ambush, they come into the city, they burn it. The Benjamites turn around and realize they're defeated. They flee, they panic and flee. And 25,000 of the Benjamites are slaughtered and killed. 600 men escape to a place called the Rock of Rimmon of their soldiers. So of all the men, there's 600 surviving. And so verse 48 is kind of an interesting conclusion because they've completely defeated the Benjamite army. They've destroyed them, and they've humbled them, right? The pride they had, like, you're not going to tell us what to do. And so it should end there, right? I mean, God said, I'll deliver them to you. And they've been delivered, but let's read verse 48. The men of Israel then turned back against the sons of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, both the entire city with cattle and everything they found. Then they also set fire to all the cities which they found. So now we're going to just exterminate them. And so they go on what should have been more of a holy war, and we're done. And God said, I'll deliver them to you to revenge. This is really more driven not so much out of righteousness, but out of anger and revenge, right? And so they go a little bit too far. And that's where chapter 21 picks up. They realize later that maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. So when we look in chapter 21, verse 1, It says, now the men of Israel had sworn in Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to a Benjamite in marriage. Okay? So the people came to Bethel and sat there before God until evening and lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, why, O Lord God of Israel, has this come upon in Israel, so that one tribe should be missing today in Israel? Well, okay. I think God can answer that. It came about the next day that the people arose early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So they were feeling guilty, feeling sorry, realizing what they did was foolish, and they've essentially nearly exterminated an entire tribe of the nation of Israel. So they say in verse 5, then the sons of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up in the assembly of the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who had not come up to the Lord at Mizpah. So when they all gathered, in the beginning of chapter 20, they made this oath. And the oath said this, that if you broke it, you would surely be put to death. There was a penalty of death if you broke that. So another foolish oath, right? Kind of in the line of Othniel that we read about earlier. And the sons of Israel were sorry for their brother Benjamin and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who are left? Since we have sworn by the Lord not to give any of our daughters to marriage. Because if they do, they die, right? That's the pledge they made. So they've got a problem. They obviously made a rash oath, and so they've got to figure out a solution. So they come up with what I call solution number one, right? So solution number one is verses 8 through 15. And it says, and they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah? So did everybody come up when we gathered? And behold, no one had come from the camp of Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were numbered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 valiant warriors there and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the little ones. This is the thing you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every man and woman who has laid with a man. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. And the whole congregation sent word and spoke to the sons of Benjamin, who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. They said, look, we're not going to slaughter you. We realize what we've done. We've gone too far. You guys, escaped. We're declaring peace. So Benjamin returned, the 600 returned at that time, and they gave them the women who they kept alive from the women of Jabesh Gilead. Yet there was not enough for them. And the people were sorry for Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So first solution is let's try to find somebody that didn't take the oath, right? And let's now say that they're guilty of death, and so let's go kill them. And let's kill everybody, but let's don't kill the young virgins, and then we'll kind of have them as the wives for these Benjamites, and that way they can continue as a tribe, and they'll exist. The only problem is, the idea is it's a holy war, but it's a contrived war, and based on their own foolish oath. And then they're 200 short, right? We got a problem. So they come up with another solution, and that's in verses 19 through 24. So this is doing what's right in your own eyes, right? This is sort of doing everything you feel makes sense. I got a problem, this is what I'm going to do. So verse 19. So they said, behold, there's a feast of the Lord from year to year in Shiloh, which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south side of Lebanon. And they commanded the sons of Benjamin, saying, Go lie in wait in the vineyards and watch. And behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to take part in the dances, then you shall come up out of the vineyards, each of you, and catch a wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and then go to the land of Benjamin. And it shall come about that when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, that we will say to them, Give them to us voluntarily, because we did not take for each man of Benjamin a wife in battle, nor did you give them to them, else you would be guilty. So in other words, it's a sort of a technical solution, right? Go kidnap them against their will and just go along with it, because you won't break the vow. You were in Mizpah, but we need your daughters as wives for them. But because you didn't give them, they took them, you're okay. You don't have to die. So that's the solution, right? And so it's kind of laughable. So the sons of Benjamin did so. They took wives according to their number from those who danced, whom they carried away. And they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the cities and lived in them. The sons of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family, and each one of them went out from there to his inheritance. So it sounds great, right? I mean, we were able to scrap together 600 women who are now wives for the Benjamites, and we've solved our problem. But I talked about earlier about the progression, right, of cause and effect, of doing what's right in your own eyes. So a concubine thinks it's right to leave her husband, and so she goes to live with her father, and it starts there. And the man goes to get his wife, and he goes into what he thinks is a safe city. And it's interesting that the irony in all of this, if you go to a Benjamite city, you would think that you would have protection, right? But that's actually much more dangerous probably than the Jebusite city. I mean, he didn't think he would actually have people trying to rape him, right? And he would have to throw out his concubine and they would rape her and kill her. That probably wasn't in his mind. And then it advances to her dying and then him wanting revenge. And now we have this war. And essentially what happens is you have a marital crisis this woman leads to her rape and murder. And that multiplies to the kidnapping and rape of 400 victims, innocent victims of the city of Jabesh Gilead, right? Their fathers, their brothers killed. They're taken, kidnapped, and essentially raped. I mean, they're forced to be the wives of these men. And then 200 innocent daughters of Shiloh. Think about them, right? They're not protecting them. They're now taken against their will. They're kidnapped and they're raped. And when you total it all up, the death of 65,000 Israelite men, 40,000 of the sons of Israel, and 25,000 of the Benjamites. So that's a heavy toll, right? Cause and effect. Everybody doing what's right in their own eyes. And God's just sort of letting it play out, right? And I think he's just really he does that in the world today too. I mean, look at the cause and effect of sin in the world today. Are things going pretty good in the world today? Like, politically or socially, right? God's just sitting back saying, you just do what's right in your own eyes. See how that goes. And so we start to see this idea that human solutions do not correct spiritual problems. They never have, and they never will, right? But we always think we're smarter, that we can somehow change the world or we can shape the world the way we want to. But I think one of the things that I see when I read this story is just how terrible things can go when we think and do things the way we think is right in our own eyes, right? It's a classic example. When we saw it a little bit earlier with Micah and the Danites, but certainly here, this is how it goes, right? And the irony of things, right? So the irony is they engage in a holy war against Benjamin. And with the determination, the passion, and the brutality that they should have displayed against the Canaanites in chapter 1. They showed more mercy to the Canaanites, and they lived amongst them, than they did to their fellow countrymen, the Benjamites, right? So, again, that's doing right in your own eyes. So what drove that? That was rage, that was anger, that was revenge. And then later they were sorry, so then now we got to fix it. And so it's like some of these fiction shows you watch on TV, right? That are just sort of disasters. People, they murder somebody and they try to fix it, or they have the solution, and eventually they end up just getting caught, or their life's a shamble, right? And well, that's kind of what happens here. And the book ends in verse 25, right? And so we brought this up as one of the things we think of when we read the book of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The end, right? So you read this book and you're like, wow, that's depressing. If you're just to read this and that's the end, like, wow, okay, that's pretty depressing. So what I want to do as we kind of bring this to a close is not necessarily leave it there, right? Because when you read the book of Judges and you just read it as a story, yeah, it is kind of depressing. People's lives are a mess. We can be very critical of everybody here. I can't believe they acted this way. They had access to God. They could actually talk to him, and you had this priest, and you had Joshua some 50 years ago. How could you be doing this? Like, what's going on here? There really is not any good news in and of itself. It's a result of people doing what's right in their own eyes. We read that eventually these kings, it says in those days there was no king in Israel. Well, okay, it won't be long, there will be kings, right? Saul, David, Solomon. And then things, go pretty well, and then things go kind of south, right? And so the kings of Israel don't provide any true lasting deliverance either, right? And then what happens to Israel? They just sort of spin out, right? They're occupied, they're restored, but they're just a mess, right? God's people are a mess. And as you read through the Old Testament sort of ends that way too, right? It's like, well, it's kind of depressing, right? Where's this going to go? And let's talk about today. Don't we all struggle with doing what's right in our own eyes? I just really want us to think about that. We talked about idolatry, things that really gather your attention, your purpose, right? So when you have to ask yourself, what really do I find my purpose and my passion? And am I pursuing that more than am I pursuing God? And so we all sin and we all fall short of the glory of God. That means we all do what's right in our own eyes. And we're really no different spiritually than anybody here in the book of Judges. Now, we may not be going out and pounding on the door and wanting to commit homosexual rape, right? I mean, we just think that's just terrible. But we know from reading God's word that he doesn't consider degrees of sin. Sin is sin, right? We like to put degrees on it, but God doesn't. So the whole book of Judges really shows us that we are the problem, right? Mankind is the problem. God isn't the problem. We're the problem. And that we can't be a solution to our problem. We try to, and we read all throughout the Old Testament of people trying to solve their problems. We see it here. But we are, just like them, unable to deliver ourselves. We can't deliver ourselves spiritually. Human solutions will never overcome spiritual problems, ever. And what we need is a true king and a true deliverer. And really that's what I think, if you were to look at what's the positive message in this, that it points to a true king and a true deliverer to help us overcome our slavery to sin and the consequences of that, which is death, right? And that's the good news of the gospel. So if you think about where Judges ends, and if that's the end, that really isn't the end. It may have been the end before Christ came and the full revelation of God's plan. But we have a true deliverer. Man can't deliver himself. I mean, what these human judges and deliverers did at best lasted temporarily. What the spiritual leaders did at best lasted temporarily. What the kings did at best lasted temporarily. But what Jesus did lasts forever. And so I want to try to link that together, right, as we walk away from the study. And the psalmist writes in Psalm 96 of Jesus, verses 10 through 13, "Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Indeed, the world is firmly established. It will not be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar, and all it contains. Let the field exult, and all that is in it. Then all the trees of the forest will sing for joy before the Lord, for he is coming. For he is coming to judge the earth, and he will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in his faithfulness." That's a lot more positive of a message, right, than the end of Judges. And the psalmist points to Christ, and then the Apostle Paul writes of Christ in chapter 2 and verse 4, talking about how we're to take on certain characteristics, right? Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also the interest of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, our true King and our true deliverer, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. But he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men, being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. And we find that he achieved ultimate strength through weakness, right? He submitted himself to become that king and that deliverer. Verse 9, "For this reason also God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that the name of Jesus, at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth." Everybody, everywhere that's ever existed. And every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And so, isn't that a lot better message, right? As we look at what is kind of a depressing book, and we know that we're just as guilty as all of these people here, and we can't correct ourselves, we can't deliver ourselves from any of the problems. And when we do, what happens? Kind of like what happens in this story. Our lives are a mess. And the only true deliverer is Christ. So, while we see God's grace, right, in the book of Judges, we talked about that quite a bit, going through how time after time people abandoned him, even through the whole Old Testament. It goes on and on through the nation of Israel. He extends grace. He gives them things that they cannot provide for themselves. He provides mercy and grace to them. But throughout all of the book of Judges, we see that. But it's the fullness of God's grace that's been revealed through his son, Jesus Christ. That's the fullness. That's what he had envisioned before the world began. And we're blessed to obtain our righteousness through our obedient faith in him when we submit to Christ, when we become Christians. And it's his blood that cleanses us from our sins, and it transfers us from death into life, right? And so, isn't that a lot better message than in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That could be said of the United States today, right? Or the world today. That's mankind. So that's the message of no hope, and the message of Christ is one of hope. And so any thoughts on that? Did we kind of bring this to a close? So, okay. So I just really appreciate everybody's kind attention throughout the study and comments. I've enjoyed the study. I hope that it's been one that's been profitable for you. Maybe maybe there's some things in here. I've always find in a Bible study, if there's one or two things you can take away, that's good. It's a win, right? And so hopefully there's a few things in the study that you can say, you know what, I kind of got something from that, and I hope that's the case. So appreciate you all and look forward to continuing to teach at various times. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate it.